Discussion over dinner. This is our home. I came to listen to you, to talk with you, 'cause I don't want to be a stranger, to find hope with you, to grow with you, and whether we are different or the same, I want to know your name. Discussion Over Dinner is sponsored and underwritten by State Street Community Church and the PAC Center.
Good evening to everyone watching online, streaming with us on our Discussion Over Dinner Facebook page. We are glad to have you tonight at our February Discussion Over Dinner. Just to kind of, if you're new with us or you're streaming for the first time, to give you a kind of a breakdown of what's happening. Every month we have a conversation here at State Street Community Church, and it's not necessarily a religious conversation, but it's a community conversation. We believe that better conversations need to happen so that we become better neighbors, and we tackle a different topic each month, and tonight's topic is going to be on the Black experience in LaPorte County. Now, we're going to be talking about things like race, and obviously it's a topic that many people get nervous about naturally because we don't know how to talk about it well, or we don't want to say the wrong thing, or we don't want to maybe perhaps offend. And so this is a safe space for this conversation. Obviously, like every other month, you're going to be texting your questions into our panel phone number there. That's on the screen, or if you're watching, it'll be put up as well. And you can text it in. We don't know who texts it. Obviously, it's anonymous. And if it's a good question, I'll ask it. If it's not, we will ignore it. So I do want to say a couple things real quick before I introduce you to our panelists tonight. We have a wonderful panel that I'm so humbled and honored to have with us tonight. Tonight's a night about race. It's Black History Month. It's a night about talking about the Black experience in LaPorte County. Obviously, I'm a 6'5" white guy, and so I don't know if you guys picked that up or not. So tonight, for me, I might be asking questions, but I'm listening and learning, because it's really important for me as a LaPorte County citizen, as someone that wants to learn and love people in deeper and more profound ways, to not talk, but to listen. And so I do want to say a couple things. We want to make sure that we check all of our privilege at the door, and that we are concerned with the other more than we're concerned about preserving our own status and things like that. And that we're going to be talking about experiences. And just because you might not have experienced the same thing doesn't negate someone else's experience. Also, we want to not assume. Don't assume that you know. Don't assume somebody else's experience. Don't try to teach someone else's experience as if it was your own. Also, above all, it's a value here at State Street. And now that you're here right now, you don't have to be a Christian, but you're a State Streeter now. We need to respect and honor everyone. We need to respect and honor everyone and everyone's experience. And like I said, in the foundation in reclaiming the art of good neighboring starts with listening. And so I'm going to introduce our panel. You are welcome to start texting in questions if you have them, and we will get to them and talk a little bit about it with our three panelists. But before we do that, let me introduce our panelists for you. She's currently the Executive Director of the LaPorte County Juvenile Services Center, serving in the position since January 1st, 2009. Prior to that, she served as Assistant Director, Counseling Supervisor, Caseworker, and Youth Specialist Worker, all within the Juvenile Services Center. She is a 1996 graduate of LaPorte High School, where she ranked number 3 in her class, number 1 in our hearts, number 3 in her class, and was voted prom queen. Now you're just bragging. The first African-American prom queen in LaPorte High School history. She holds a bachelor's degree, yes. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Spelman College, a master's degree in social work from the University of Michigan. This is a Church of Notre Dame fans. So. And a Juris Doctorate degree from Loyola University Chicago School of Law. She has a certificate in child and family law and is licensed to practice law in the state of Indiana. She has served on several community boards, including Family Advocates Incorporated, the Membership Advisory Committee of the National Juvenile Justice Network, and the Indiana Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative Steering Committee. She is an alumni fellow of the Youth Justice Leadership Institute of the National Juvenile Justice Network. That's a mouthful. And a founding member of the Children's Policy and Law Initiative of Indiana, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting the rights of children. She was recently accepted into the Reducing Ethnic and Racial Disparities in Juvenile Justice Certificate Program at Georgetown University. In 2008, she was appointed by the Indiana Speaker of the House of Representatives to serve on the Governor's Commission on Disproportionality in Youth Services. In addition to her role at the Juvenile Justice Center and practicing law, she is also a part-time photographer, something that brings her great joy. Please welcome my dear friend, Erika Stallworth. Hi, Erika. Hey. He was born and raised in LaPorte, Indiana, where he graduated from LaPorte High School. All right. He's a small business owner and industry leader and expert in advanced metering information technologies. He has over 29 years of visionary leadership and hands-on experience in electric distribution systems, natural gas distribution systems, and coal-fired power plant efficiency engineering, and customer service technologies and operations. He's smart. He managed many different types of workforces throughout his career, many of which, the majority, were always white. This experience has allowed him to view race issues from a different side than most. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering Technology from Purdue University. An Executive Master's of Business Administration from the University of Notre Dame. And a Master's of Science in Human Resources Management and Development from National Louis University. Please welcome my good friend, Richard Pate. Hey, Richard, you're so distant over there. I'm glad you're here, buddy.
I'm glad I'm here, too.
She joined NIPSCO's Public Affairs and Communications team in 2011, where she was responsible for community outreach and government relations. She is now a project manager for gas operations and is responsible for pipeline compliance programs. She's involved with several employee resource groups and is the 2018 chair of the Energetic Women's Conference in Orlando, Florida. This focuses on leadership development for women in engineering and operations at utility companies across the United States. She also launched her own consulting firm, I&D Squared Consulting, LLC, in 2017, focused on improving diversity and inclusion in the region. Her goal is to work with local nonprofits and businesses on improving relationships and services to diverse customers, attracting and retaining top talent, and building an inclusive leadership culture. She has a green belt and is currently working on gaining her black belt in Lean Six Sigma. Watch yourself. She is also very active with several non-for-profit organizations, which is how we met through her work with Leadership LaPorte. Her passion is geared towards youth leadership and education. She is a sponsor of the Student United Way at Michigan City High School. She is on the board of directors of the Unity Foundation of LaPorte County, LaPorte County Career and Tech Center Advisory Board, LaPorte County United Way, Urban League of Northwest Indiana, and the Food Bank of Northern Indiana. She just completed her term as the board chair for the Urban League in the United Way. Prior to her position with NIPSCO, she was always involved in the community. She was an elected at-large member of the Michigan City County Common Council for 4 years, beginning in 2008. She has served as a board member of Doombrook, CASA, Harmony House, Michigan City Economic Development Corporation, Michigan City Housing Authority, the HOPE Program, and the NAACP. She also served as a member of the Michigan City Area Schools Strategic Core Team. She has done volunteer work for the Boys and Girls Club and the Minority Health Coalition. I'm exhausted just reading this. She's a member of several women's civic organizations that include the Drifters Incorporated, the Lynx Incorporated, and Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She currently... Are you in the same sorority?
Yeah.
Woo, woo. No, I didn't do it. No. Our first lesson of the night. No. I'm going to do more listening. She currently serves as president of the Greater Michigan City chapter of the Drifters and is parliamentarian for the National Board of Directors for Drifters. She has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the is that Florida?
Florida A&M.
Florida A&M University, Florida State University, College of Engineering. She also has a Master's of Public Affairs in Public Administration from Indiana University. She resides in Michigan City with her family, who you brought your husband.
Yep.
Yeah. She has received several accolades and was selected as the Humanitarian of the Year in 2018 from the Michigan City Human Rights Commission. She was named the United Way Volunteer of the Year in 2017, yeah. In 2014, she was named Influential Woman of Northwest Indiana's Up-and-Coming Business Women of the Year. In the same year, as if it wasn't enough, got a little greedy, she won South Shore's Leaders as Heroes Award. She also received the Lester Radke Community Service Award in 2013. She also received the Community Service Award from Leadership LaPorte County in 2016. Please, everyone, welcome Angie Nelson-Deuitch.
Thank you. I didn't know you were going to read all.
No, I want to read it all because it's all very important, and I'm super impressed. And it's an amazing legacy.
I was born and raised in Michigan City, though.
But Michigan City High School?
And I went to Elston.
All right. All right. We've got a lively group. Everyone's very passionate about the things about themselves.
Elston Red Devils.
All right. Everyone, I need you to bring your microphones closer to you. Every episode we have this problem, and we're gonna fix it tonight. Okay.
Jeez. All right.
So let's talk about our stories, guys. Richard, where are you from?
From LaPorte.
You gotta get closer to the microphone, buddy.
Gotta get closer.
Yeah, bring that microphone closer to you.
You can't hear me?
Yeah, there we go. Our streamers, our online people have to hear you too. So you got to speak loud enough for the back.
Oh, I think normally hear me anyway.
Mm.
But I was born and raised in LaPorte, Indiana. Most of my work career was done outside of LaPorte. I spent 19 years working for NIPSCO, NiSource. I worked for a company called Landis & Gear out of Lafayette, Indiana. I was telling people that earlier. It used to be called Duncan Metering. Duncan produced the first electric meter for Thomas Edison. And so this was an offshoot. They are the largest electric meter manufacturer in the world. And I was marketing manager for customer service there. Worked for AEP in South Bend, where I ran the line department, the distribution engineers. Distribution engineers are the people who put the poles up. And all those wires that run through our community, they're responsible for putting those up. And it was one of the busiest barns of the AEP system, which is the largest distribution system in the nation. And then I went to work for a company in Pittsburgh when a headhunter found me, a company called Census. Most of you don't know Census. Census is the largest water meter manufacturer in the world. And all the water meters that have just been replaced in LaPorte are Census water meters. But I was there for the electric side. And with that, I was responsible for the electric meter production. I'm doing you my professional history.
Yeah, you're good.
And I'll lead into some aspects of that.
No, you go. You go, boy.
But there, we were producing 2.5 million electric meters, smart meters, a year, of which I was working with the engineering, manufacturing, and we were producing 350,000 meters a month. That equated to roughly $500 million to $700 million being pulled into Census's coffers, and we pushed them over to be $1 billion corporation. The interesting thing about being in Census is I went to a little town there. I can't even think of the name of it now. But when I walked in, there was about 400 workers in that plant. There were 3 blacks. They were all working on the line. I walked in, I was the only management. And there was this look like, who is he? And where did he come from? By the time I left there, it was just another challenge to me. They all knew me. They all liked me. And everybody wanted to talk to me. And people asked me, they said, how do you do that? And I said, well, I was born and raised in LaPorte, Indiana, white middle-class America, LaPorte, Indiana. I think more white than you do. And I had, my peers would ask me that. And I would, like I said, I've managed many different workforces, technical workforces, and majority of them were white males. And they would ask me again, how do you do that? I said, I was born in white middle-class America. I have the same values you do. It's just that I'm black. And that has what helped me throughout my life, and probably the thing that opens me up more with what we want to talk about tonight, because in those conversations, I would have a room of workers this size, and I'm sitting up there, and they've never had a black boss before. And we'd be talking, and a lot of things would come up, and so a lot of the things that people are talking about today, we had to deal with. And usually when I left it, and like I said, I'm like Nate, you got to learn to listen. First thing my employees always ask me, what are you going to do? I said, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to you, and then I'm going to ask questions before I come up with an answer. And they said, well, how do you know you succeed? I said, as long as you will tell me, and you will tell me if I was fair or not. And the majority of my workforce that I left have always said, we got to say you were honest and you were fair.
Yeah, that's great. But Richard, when you walk in there then, just by being black, you already have a hurdle in front of you with many of the people you were working with then. So you had to prove to them, because of your race or because of their implicit bias, that you could understand them, or what was it, you think? Or just they had no experience? Or
basically, it was no experience. Now, I'm in the utility industry, and I was also a director, which means I managed managers. And we'd go to conferences, and they would say, well, we'd meet up. We'd go to these national conferences. They said, well, we need to meet up. I said, how are we going to find you? I said, you find me. And at the end of the conference, they'd come back and they said, you're right. I said, duh. But, it was interesting. It was always a new adventure as they walk in, because the obvious issue is I'm black and I'm big. And so it was always a surprise for them. When I went to work over at AAP, the manager there didn't tell him that I was a black when I came in. So when he first came in, he just told him, says, he's different. He's different. But at the end of it, it was a great opportunity, because I'm a change agent, which I like being out on the cutting edge. I like controversy, and I go head to head with it, because that's what I grew up with. Being born and raised here in LaPorte, Indiana, at the age in middle school, if my friends' parents were prejudiced, I could pick that up. And one of my friends was saying, my dad was prejudiced. I said, I knew.
What?
I could pick that up immediately. And it's just like a sixth sense. My wife, Chris over there, who's sitting out there.
The wonderful
hiding.
Chris Pate.
Yeah. We were at LaPorte High School. Now, how the prejudice and the issues in the community affect you. When our oldest was going to LaPorte High School, well, we knew the assistant principal. She lived around the corner from us. We were in her office, and we were talking and laughing with her, and she was yelling down the hall at the principal of LaPorte High School at that time, who's long been gone, and he was laughing and joking. And so she said, well, I'll take you down there to meet him. When we walked in the room, the atmosphere changed. And I knew right away what it was. On the way out, Chris looks over at me and says, that man's a racist. I said, you saw that? She says, yes, I did. Because she'd been around and she was exposed to it. It was very obvious that she knew it. So, when you run into situations like that, there's like a sixth sense that goes up, and you know what you have to do. So I don't crowd. I've learned over the years not to crowd them, but I talk to them. But some people will change and want to change, and some people don't. And depending on who you are, where you are with that, it can be a quick or it can be a very long process. So
Thanks, Richard. Erika, now I do want to say Erika provides a very important role in my life. We've been on a board together, and she was the board president of Family Advocates when I came on the board. Now I am the board president. It's like a replacing the Lexus with a Meyer brand version of it. But Erika has an innate ability to give me a look or to tell me you need to stop. Just calm down. I think I got that a couple times. Calm down. And I listen every time because I respect Erika and I just love her so much. But Erika, you said you graduated from LaPorte High School. Okay. What year?
1996.
1996. Prom queen. LaPorte has, in the city of LaPorte, about 3% black residents, okay, as you probably know. And you're also in the justice system, which has a lot of, racial conversations happening right now. So what's been your experience? You were voted prom queen, but did you feel a lot of, essentially tension in that? Or, how was your experience in high school?
Let me go back to elementary school.
Go ahead.
So my experience growing up in LaPorte County it's not been really bad. I'm still here, clearly. I grew up in a very small township called Kingsford Heights, Indiana.
Woohoo!
I grew up in Kingsford Heights. I went to Kesley Middle School and LaPorte High School. But as a young child, my mother, she explained to me that, people will probably look at me differently. I'll probably be treated differently. But that doesn't mean that I am different in a way that I'm not as smart as someone else. So I held on to that all my life, even when I went off to college and to different universities and things like that. But I can remember as a child, I was probably in kindergarten or first grade. I knew how to read before I went to kindergarten.
That doesn't shock me.
Because my older cousins, we're still close, they taught me how to read. I can remember that I knew how to read. I was put into the lowest level reading group in the very beginning of the school year. And I did not know why, because I knew how to read. Mm-hmm. But I ended up, at the end of the year, being in the highest level. So that was just like something small. And I don't know if my mother had a conversation with the teacher. I don't know.
Did you have a conversation?
I don't know.
You did, good.
I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but I still remember that at age 41, that I was put in a lower level reading group, and I don't know why. I remember being called the N-word on the elementary school playground. I remember kids asking kind of ignorant questions about my hair, just, out of some innocence, some not, and just having to navigate those conversations. And then in high school, I remember when the teachers, bless their hearts, wanted to teach about slavery. If there's anyone in the room that feels uncomfortable, you may excuse yourself. Who are you talking to? Clearly. So, things like that just made it very uncomfortable. But then on the other side, I had teachers who cut out articles about Spelman College and set it on my desk. They talked to me about what I wanted to do. They encouraged me. So I didn't have a really bad experience, but I had to learn how to navigate those kind of things. And I did well at LaPorte. I've done well in LaPorte County. But that hasn't been the case for everybody. Yeah. I have privilege because I'm a woman. Mm-hmm. My male counterparts may not have had those experiences. Mm-hmm. I know they haven't had those same experiences. Just 2 days ago, I got a call from a really good friend of mine, and it's just ironic that we're having this panel today. She called me. I'm an attorney. I don't do criminal law. But she called me, and her son was actually in the back of a police car. He was coming home from the grocery store, and it was in this county. I'm not going to say what city. He was coming home from the grocery store and unloading his car to take the groceries into the house where his girlfriend and his baby daughter were, and the police surrounded him. And they put him in the back of the police car. They told him he looked suspicious and that they had heard that there were some gunshots being shot in the neighborhood. So he was somehow able to call his mother and his father, and they called me, and I just gave them some advice on what they needed to do. He ended up going to the police station where he was interrogated, and they explained to him that the reason that he was picked up and taken to the police station is that a neighbor called and said that his car matched the description of someone who was shooting. Now, I understand that the police have to do their job. Like, I work with law enforcement. I'm the director of a juvenile detention center. So, I mean, I work with law enforcement. I'm very good friends with law enforcement. But as a black man, I can't really speak as a black man, but I can only imagine how that must affect your spirit. And that's just not a one-time thing. That's when you're out on the street, you know, and people cringe when they see you. I've had, you know, I have a brother. I've had boyfriends who I walk next to them, and women, white women, will just cringe, and you can see the fear in their eyes. And then they look at me and they just relax. I've been in a car where I've been stopped as an adult 6 years ago in a city I'm not going to name. I was looking at Christmas decorations.
Name and shame, go ahead.
I'm not. I was looking at, I told you I work with law enforcement.
I know.
I was looking at Christmas decorations. It was in a ritzy neighborhood that I hadn't seen before. We were looking at Christmas lights. Following all the laws, we got stopped. We were told that we were stopped because we looked suspicious. Why do I look suspicious? It's Christmas time. We're looking at Christmas decorations. So me, I tried to let my then boyfriend handle the situation because I can, you know. But it was not going well. The officer was very aggressive. The way that he talked to him was very demeaning. Oh. How long have you lived here? Why are you over at this side of town? You know, what are you doing out this late? Minding our own business. So I said, may I speak? Because I wanted him to handle it, and so I spoke. And I said some things. His supervisor ended up coming. I ended up filing a complaint. And it was resolved as best as it could be, you know. But those are just some experiences that I've experienced. But, you know, as a black woman, like, I know that I have privilege that my male counterparts do not.
It's Erika, I never even thought about this. In this way of my privilege, you know, every year, right, we go look at Christmas lights, that you have to be afraid that what if someone sees you and calls the cops just because of your skin color? That's never even crossed my mind, obviously, because I'm a white man that has infinite amounts of privilege. And that had to have been a tremendous. Now, Richard, Erika, you guys both are in LaPorte school systems, graduated, right? Did you have any black teachers?
No.
I had one, and she was excellent. Mrs. Blakemore, she taught me how to swim, and she was excellent. So if I can go on a little bit.
Please do.
Because of that experience, like just not seeing educators that look like me, I ended up going to HBCU, Spelman College, and for the first time in my life, I saw professors that looked like me.
By the way, can you explain HBCU?
Historically Black College and University. They were developed because back when slavery was abolished, African Americans were not allowed to go to the same colleges as their white counterparts. So we developed our own institutions. And so they're historically black because they're open to all still, but the history that goes around with it is historically black. And so a lot of people in my family, we go to HBCUs. And coming from LaPorte, it was just the greatest experience. It was just such a contrast, and just going there and being surrounded by people who actually look like me, because I was out of class of 1996, there were only 9 of us out of 425 students. Yeah. So leaving LaPorte, going to Atlanta, Georgia, for one, it was culture shock, but then just being on that campus and just being around professors who just, they taught me things that was in LaPorte High School, I learned about slavery, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. But then when I went to my HBCU, I learned about W.E.B. Du Bois. I learned about some African leaders. The world just opened, you know, and it made me just a more well-rounded person.
That's great.
But I had to leave LaPorte to get that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. See, now when I went to school, there were no black teachers. And thinking about it, I've never had one. I have 2 master's degrees and an undergrad degree. I've never had a black professor, never had a black teacher. But fortunately, I had white teachers who cared about me. And I'm like you, I'm very fortunate. I had black privilege because I could talk. And I could talk reasonably. Some of the teachers talking about elementary school, when you bring that, I went to Washington Elementary School over here, which is closed. And we were the smallest elementary school in LaPorte County, in LaPorte school system. But in my 5th and 6th grade, we won basketball, football, ring toss, and we were a diverse group of people. But we were minorities, blacks particularly, few Hispanics, and a lot of poor whites. I had a male teacher there, a Mr. Ford, and I remember going to football games in elementary school. We're playing for the championship, and his wife is the only one sitting on our stand side because all our parents are working. They couldn't come to the schools, and the other parents over there cheering and sneering at us as kids because they didn't want us to win. Before he passed away, I got a chance to see him after I came home from the Navy, and I recognized my black privilege. And it was probably one of the best things I'd ever done, is I went to him and I thanked him. That man cried. But that man and his wife had helped mold me through all the years of seeing and building who I was. Even though he was white, he treated us just like anyone else. We had a bus driver, a Mrs. Swanson. She picked up all the black kids. and I come to find out that her husband was a racist. But every day we got on that bus, she smiled at all of us and said hello. I thanked her. I was able to thank her after coming back. And her son, who's a mechanic, was riding with me, and I was telling him about my car. I didn't know it was her son. And he says, "You Richard Pate?" I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "You know Mrs. Swanson, the bus driver?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "That was my mom." He said, "She liked you." But, you know, she always, all the black kids got on the bus, we all liked her because she treated us all the same. And she always smiled every time we got on the bus. She never gave us a hassle. Those are the kind of people who I remember. And as I tell people, that's the white America I remember.
Angie, did you go to the Michigan City schools or LaPorte?
Yeah, I grew up in Eastport in Michigan
okay,
City.
Eastport, yeah.
So
Michigan City, LaPorte, very different, right?
Yes.
I don't know if you guys, if you know or not. I'll give you the statistics just so you have. According to the last census, obviously in 2020 this will be updated, but in LaPorte the statistics are 88.6% white, 3% black. In Michigan City, it's 64.9% white, 28.1% black. Mm-hmm. So there's a larger minority population, correct?
Yes. So. Elementary school for me was different. I went to Eastport, pretty diverse school. Really didn't experience, our teachers looked at we didn't really have color in elementary school. That didn't happen until junior high school, where you start seeing the division and the divide, and you start grouping with your own people. And I say it that way because Eastport was a special place, and I still talk to my teachers. I've stayed in touch with them through the years. I think did you go to Eastport? So Eastport, our teachers were our friends, and they knew our parents, and they looked at us more like their children. And, you know, as far as what our abilities were, they didn't look at us differently. My first experience with racism or a teacher treating me differently was at Krieger. I was the only black person in my math class and my English class at that time. And then maybe a month into school, they moved me into the advanced science class. And I had a teacher named Mr. Galafero. I don't know if anybody knew Mr. Galafero. He's passed on. But when I was moved into that class, he actually had me come in front of the class and congratulated me on being the first black person in his advanced science class. Kind of paraded me. And, you know, my mom was like, she was like, this is an opportunity. So for her, she was like, just get the grades, you know, don't cause any ruckus. Right. Yeah. So, you know, I would have probably went in there and done something crazy. But so that was the first time I experienced that. And it was like, okay, I'm just going to let this go. And Mr. Galafero, he was nice to me, but just him putting me in front of the class like that as a, 7th grader.
As an other. Right?
Yes, as an other. was different. And so, that was the first time I experienced something like that. And then as going through high school, and high school was good for me. I was an athlete. I did different things. So popular, I was a class officer. So the only other situation that I really dealt with was with my counselors when I decided on where I wanted to go to school. I went to HBCU as well. So why would you want to do that? Why would you want to go there? That kind of thing. Why would you pick that school? I thought you were going to go to Purdue. So those kind of things kind of swaying me away from that, from going there. So I went to FAMU. We call it FAMU. I'm a rattler. And but the school was with Florida State. So we had our own challenges, too, because now we have a black university, predominantly black, and then you have Florida State, and our School of Engineering was joint. And most of the companies at that time were looking for African-American engineers. They were trying to develop programs where they actually hired more minorities. So in that case, there was some friction between the students because companies were coming on FAMU's campus and not Florida State's campus. And they wanted the same privileges on our campus. And I said, most of us said, pay your tuition over here and you can get those privileges, right? But they didn't want to do that. So just different. But, for me, diversity was always around. I think in the workplace has been different.
Okay.
I think as an engineer, first of all, there weren't that many female students. And then being black. So the assumption is like, we hired, and you stayed in the system, in justice system, working your way up. But, as a black female, they said, they needed to fill their quota. If I get hired somewhere, it's not because I'm qualified. It's because, she's black and she's female. That's a double whammy, right? Sure. And not because I'm good at what I do. So those are the kind of things I think that our experiences are probably, especially for a professional, you have to deal with. Same thing with my kids. I remember moving my kids I moved around a lot early on in my career, but then went to parochial school. And even with my daughter, she's in Houston now, and she, just dealing with navigating her being the only black in certain classes or one of two, and then making assumptions, like you said. She started reading before the rest of the kids also. But just those little assumptions that, in the back of their mind, there's no way they could be that smart or, because they're black, there's certain things that they're dealing with. And I think that's why conversations are need to be had. I like Leadership LaPorte County because we talk about it. I don't know if that one class was super quiet. They didn't ask any questions, but when you don't have the discussion and you don't create a safe space for people to ask questions, I think that's when things fester. I tell my husband Jeff is wave your hand, Jeff. Go ahead. Jeff. So. Jeff is the first white person I ever dated, okay? Just going to say that. And I married him, right? So, but I remember him even saying to me, I thought, you never dated a white guy. I'm thinking to myself, why would you say that? Because I'm a professional that I wouldn't, but it wasn't even about, people say they don't see color and they say all those things. Well, we became friends first, so that's the main thing. And I don't think people realize that, we're such a diverse area right now. I mean, just America in general, and we become so polarized again. And I don't know how we got from becoming this melting pot to being so divisive again. It's just kind of weird because, there's more, there is more intermingling of all races than ever before, but now we become more angry about it, and it's just I've never seen such a thing, go on. So
I want to. You brought up two questions for me. We'll get to the first one here. Angie, you talked about that otherness, right? Being brought up into the front of the room and, made to feel like an other,
right.
Even though maybe it was well-intentioned or maybe it wasn't, But when was the last time in your adult life, you can either talk about the experience or just say when, as an adult, that you felt like another because of the color of your skin?
We were at the movie theater, me and my husband. So he came in behind me. So, you have that AMC Stubbs rewards thing, and they had a separate line for the people who were premier. So we're premier, and I'm kind of just standing there, but they're taking other people from the other line. They're white, I'm black, I'm standing there. My husband walks in, and I'm kind of now standing in between both. So he walks in, he gets in line, we're together, and she was like, I have to take him because he's a premier member. I'm like, I've been standing here all this time. And I was like, no, let's just get our tickets and go. And he's like, no, we're not letting this go. And I'm just like, I just want to go to the movies. Of course, he went and got the manager.
We'll fight this fight another day, right?
But he went and talked to the manager, and he's like, I'm not letting it go. And I'm thinking, man, and it was so obvious. And it was just like, okay, I've been standing here all this time. I was here in the line. Then you start taking all the other folks, and he walks up, and now it's okay. Sure. So we've experienced things like that. Mostly when we've been together that I've noticed it. Not when it's, at work. Sometimes I'm the only black female in my organization now on the gas side. So
in a male-dominated.
Yeah. So there's just some differences, and then I didn't know you were an engineer. Even Richard did that to me, though.
Richard.
You were in customer service, and I said customer service.
We're calling people out today.
But they just make people assume that, there's no way you're an engineer. Sure. And I'm thinking, okay, I am.
Oh, sorry, right?
Right. So,
but I've hired black engineers for NiSource. Okay. I hit the quota, and I do want to say,
Richard, the damage is done, Richard.
I know. Right. But I want to say about Jeff, that is a black man in a white body there.
Erika.
I'm trying to actually recall, and I can't think of anything right now recent that I
can
remember.
That's great.
So, or it could just be that I'm so used to it, I don't even acknowledge
kind of like
it
Angie
anymore.
was saying, you just kind of, we move on from these.
Yeah, I mean, you're used to it, so it is what it is.
Yeah.
That's true.
What about you, Richard?
I'm older than Angie and Erika, obviously. So my family came up here, and I was born in 1951. So
you said most recent.
I said
You did. 1951.
I said I'm older than you.
Oh, okay.
He's giving his story.
I'm giving my story.
He's building up the story.
Yeah.
So
it happened in 1951.
51. So when my family, I was born in 1951, and so every summer we would go back. My family was from Louisiana and the bayou of Louisiana. Both my grandparents were sharecroppers. I still remember my grandfather coming in from the fields because I was going to go with him one morning. I remember sitting on the porch of his shack, and there he was coming down the field with his bib overalls on behind his 2 Arkansas mules. Okay, so that's where they live. I always told my kids, I said, my family lived in the house on Sounder, not the Color Purple. Color Purple was a nice house. They lived in houses like Sounder. So we would go down every summer to visit them. And the first thing we would do is when we hit the Illinois line, you're crossing the Mason-Dixon line. So now you got to say yes, sir, no, ma'am, and all this other stuff. I said, I ain't doing that. I was born and raised here. I was never allowed to go by myself anywhere in the South because of Emmett Till. Those who don't know Emmett Till in 1950, he was beaten. He was like 14. And his mother refused, and it was up in Chicago, and his mother refused to close the casket. She wanted the world to see what they had done to her son. So they were afraid that would happen to me. And so every summer, for year after year, we would come across the Mason-Dixon line. I'd go back to Louisiana and cross that. And I still remember the water fountains, the bathrooms, colored, whites. I remember my father on the side of the road because we could not find a bathroom for his mother. She had to go in the weeds in the bathroom, and how he was crying because he was upset that had to happen to his mother. So that's the kind of Jim Crow South. I actually saw Jim Crow live. Then when the civil rights came through, that was a big issue of talking about the civil rights movement. Well, I'm in high school, middle school and high school. So the discussions were out there, and we would have them all the time in classes and around my friends. And just like Erika, the N-word was used. And they would look at me and say, "Oh, but Richard, we don't mean you." I said, "Well, who do you mean? My mother, my father, my uncle? Which one you talking about?" But, some people that would bother them, and other people it would seriously bother them. Some people, that was how they were born and raised. So it was an interesting time, but I knew at grade school that I was different because, like I said, we grew up, you don't become aware of. By middle school, it was definitely obvious that you were different. But we would do the dancing and different things, and these girls would run over to dance with me because I was different. And many times we'd go out, and they would always say, "Well, we can go out," and we would run around and acting, but they said, "Don't tell my dad." They were very quiet about it, but they were curious enough that they wanted to know and they wanted to see. And with that, over the years, I continued to do that. Chris and I, we were down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and this one, my wife, we've been together now 45 years. She was 17 and the craziest white woman. I came home looking for. I came home from the Navy looking for an older black woman. Okay, so they went to Spelman College. I went to the USN, United States Navy, during the Vietnam War, and I was around guys from Orlando or from Oakland, from Cleveland, Philadelphia, and I became very radicalized because I was angry. Because I took a black history course and I saw all of these things that black people had done. I said, this was never in my history books, and I loved history. I said, why weren't they saying this? Why weren't they telling this? So I came home angry, and I was looking for an older black woman, and this 17-year-old girl comes bouncing across there. and there we were. Well, we were in Baton Rouge, and that was in, probably, 80-something, because we had our 3 kids, so it was in the 80s. We went to a restaurant, and we sat there, and they served everybody. And I'm smoking. I'm just smoking. And I'm telling Chris, we need to leave. And she says, nope, I'm going to make them serve us. And I looked over at my oldest daughter, and she was about 7 years old at that time, and I saw she was fuming too. That was the first time I realized she got it. And she was 7 years old, and she was mad. Because she could obviously see they did not want to serve us. So when it's you, it's a little different story, but when it's your kids, it really hurts.
That's true. I think my daughter, she's a senior in high school now, but in junior high school is when Selma, the movie, came out. And I remember her coming home and having this discussion about her friends. And, that's when she really started thinking about who her true friends were. Because she talked about who would stand on the bridge with her, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things she said that in the conversation, you could tell that there was some uneasiness with some of the other students, and that, I would be on the bridge, and so there was this back and forth, and one of the students said to her, "Well, you and Chase are different," and she said, "So what's different about us? My GPA is higher than yours. What's different?" That kind of thing. And, well, you're different. So, again, they were isolated. So if you're smart and you're black, you're different.
Because you don't fit the stereotype I have.
Exactly.
Of what the expectation is. So, so getting through that with your kids and with your grandkids and making sure that they understand that we all have the same equal opportunity. Now, we start we always say this, we have to be twice as good or 10 times better as a black person
Yeah.
to even be seen or even get an opportunity. I think that's true still. Again, it's more out of, okay, well, that's Angie, or because she was smart in school, she was the smart one. And I think that's one of the things that scares me about educators and them understanding how they impact our kids. And, little simple things can make a kid feel like they're inferior. And I just think it's, I think we need more training for our teachers who are dealing with our kids. Right. Because that's the first thing. Don't put my kid aside because you think they're smarter than everybody and like this is an anomaly, and I think it happens a lot.
Oh, it does. And I could give you an example. Because Chris and I have been together for so long, and our kids, Chris has shown up at meetings where our kids could have been pigeonholed, but she showed up and used her white privilege, and we talked about it, and she says, yep, I pulled my white privilege card. And because she showed up and she spoke to the teachers, and we'd go to teacher conferences, she'd show up and I'd show up with my suit, because I wore a suit every day. And they would look at us like, where are they from?
Right.
But rather than being the norm, that was the exception.
Yeah.
But the teachers have a tremendous impact on what our kids do
Yeah,
and what they say.
we've gotten a couple questions, actually, and we're going to get to some of your questions, but a couple questions about that. Here's one. As a white teacher at a diverse local high school, how can I best support my students of color? And there's another one. As a teacher in a LaPorte elementary school, how do you suggest discussing topics with heavy racial importance like slavery? What would you guys say to that? Oh. There you go.
Yep, okay. Educate yourself first. Don't just, there's a lot of information out there.
Yeah.
So use it and find it first. Don't just stick with kind of like the Martin Luther King, who's a great man, Rosa Parks. Just saying, but there's so much more to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And yes, educate yourself first, understand it. Martin Luther King was very radical.
It was.
People forget that. 70% of America did not like him when he was alive, before he died, because of what he was saying. He was radical. So you can't be afraid of being radical. You have to deal with it head on. Educate yourself, and it's just a fact. It's just like putting a fact out there. It's just like Beckworth Pass. When they went into Oregon, through the Beckworth Pass into California, you realize that was a black man that discovered that? Nobody knows that.
And also with the teachers, just, we have our biases. And if you acknowledge that you have them when you're dealing with your kids, and try not to, I even think about hair. My daughter wears an afro. I used to wear one. Just making comments about, hair and things like that. Try to be more mindful of things that may be different. I know that even, being babysat by older black people from the South, we had different dialect, right? And everybody doesn't talk slang and jive and all that, but I felt like sometimes teachers would try to blend in, and it made it worse. You assume certain things about black people, and you try to fit in with black people. That doesn't work. Mm-hmm. If you're authentic and you know that, hey, I don't know everything, I've never experienced or been around black people, and acknowledge it and try to understand it, it'll go a long way. Our teachers at Eastport, and I talked to Ms. Penfold, Ms. Bachman, all of my elementary school teachers still to this day, because they treated us like family. It was not like I have black students and I have white students. Mm-hmm. They were the same all the time. And I think it's harder now for teachers because they have so many other things they have to do. They got all these, tests and standardized tests. So now they're trying to deal with the culture, dealing with all the things they have to do. But I think even taking some implicit bias, classes or something would be helpful.
Thanks for bringing that up, Angie. Can anybody unpack, briefly what implicit bias is? Will anybody up here can?
You should ask Chris. She teaches.
That's Chris. Yeah.
What is implicit bias?
So, well, unconscious bias. So let's say, for instance, and I won't even use race. I'll use that somebody comes in with a bunch of tattoos, right? That's become more normalized than not. But before, when you see somebody come in with tattoos all tatted up, you might think they're a part of a gang, something like that.
Your mind already starts filling in blanks.
It starts filling in blanks before even somebody speaks. So, again, me and Keisha, their daughter, were talking about this the other day, living in places where, there aren't that many black people and you get pulled over. Keisha said, if I get out the car and they see me get out the car, they're going to look at me like, whoa, she's 6 foot, There's an assumption being made that we're aggressive. Black women are aggressive. And you gotta dial that back. If you see, my brothers all have degrees, but if you see my brother, they're scruffy or whatever, they assume that maybe they've been to prison. I don't know why. They hadn't even opened their mouth. And so it's like, you can use it with just about anything. Right. I mean, and it's a lot of the stereotypes that cause that. TV, music, all those things. But implicit bias is that thing that you need to dial back before someone speaks. You see them and you just automatically assume certain things. Right. You make assumptions.
And Angie called me out on it before, like when she found out, I said, "You're an engineer?" So
as a female,
it was not that I was surprised she was an engineer. I was like, "Oh, you're an engineer," but it came out as an explicit bias, and she said, "So what?"
I know. I did. I was like, and right. So it's those things. We just it tends to happen to us more often.
Right. So we all have implicit biases. You just got to recognize them, and then once you do it, you've got to say, what are you going to do with it?
Yep.
That's great. Here's a question. All of you seem to be very accomplished. You all hold advanced degrees. You have great careers. Do you feel that your accomplishments and higher socioeconomic status have impacted your experiences?
Well, sure. I have a privilege of my education. So if I'm in a situation, for instance, when we got stopped by the police, I knew what to do. I knew that I had rights and I could ask for a supervisor, and that's what I did. I know the law because I'm a lawyer. So the privilege of my education is definitely something that I can use and have used.
And living in different places. I have a lot of friends who never left.
Same.
But even growing up, we started going to church in Kingsford Heights, and I was like, oh my God, there's black people. I mean, no, seriously, it was like a whole community. It's like we drove for 2 hours to get to Kingsford Heights.
Not that long.
On Sunday to go to church because my mom played the piano at the church, and I used to go spend the weekends over there with the Bynums and stuff and spend the night. And this is like 6th grade, and it was like, oh my God, there's black people in LaPorte, and that's how it was. It was like a neighborhood of black people that, and it was crazy because you never in Michigan City, we had diverse neighborhoods. So, education is probably one of the biggest things, whether you're going to the military or, getting an advanced degree. That changes the perspective for everybody. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. So I was the first to go to school. And then after that, everybody started going to school. So, all the girls have master's degrees. The boys went to school and got their degrees. One did 20 years in the military. And it's one of those things that once you set that precedent in your family, and I think it just becomes that thing that becomes normal. So for my family, that's normal. My siblings, kids, this is normal. But that's not the same for some of my first cousins. They never left Michigan City, so they've been here for the whole entire life. They've never seen anything different. So it's always interesting when I meet somebody who's never been to Chicago. And then you realize how small our worlds are and how big education has made it for us. Right. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah, see, for my case, I definitely have black privilege because I'm a black male with a lot of accomplishments. Now, most black males don't have that. Even in my family, I'm an anomaly. They don't know what the heck to do with me. and I did not really learn how to fit in until I got in the military, where I was around more blacks than I'd ever been around. So when I came back, I had objectives and goals, and I drove that. Actually, to be in Notre Dame, I was recruited into Notre Dame by Reverend Theodore Hesburgh on his scholarship. People don't know Reverend Hesburgh, but Reverend Hesburgh was on the first Civil Rights Commission appointed by Eisenhower. He's also one of the authors of Affirmative Action. He believed in affirmative action, and he would always ask Notre Dame for this executive MBA program. He would say, Arnie, where's the blacks? There's no black people here. Where's the minorities? And so they would try to get people in there, but it's such a rigorous program that it was difficult to get because of my Purdue background. A friend, a white coworker who had gone through the program came and told me about it, because each class they sent out and told them, we're looking for minorities who can come into this program. If you know some, send them to us. So he recruited me. And when I was filing to get in there and put in the application, Notre Dame was very specific about telling me, saying, this is a tough program. We've had minorities in here who have not made it. We don't want to do anything that's going to hurt you. You've got to do this. We can't do any more for you than we do for the others. So I had never been recruited in that way. They even brought my wife in for counseling. They counseled us together. And so not every minority has that. You see people, I tell them, I went to Notre Dame, and the first thing they asked me, said, you play football? Right. And I said, no, I got an academic scholarship. There's a deer in the headlight look. What? It's hard for them to fathom that I got an academic scholarship in the Notre Dame. I should be the norm, not the exception to the rule.
So, we have these conversations regularly because we get bogged down in a lot of federal issues, and I don't know about you guys, but I just don't know how to solve them, and I don't know what to do. And so we like to have these conversations because we can talk locally, and we can talk maybe about, there's 110,000 people in our county, and we can all learn to be better neighbors and impact the place that we live. I'm interested to know, for your guys' experience, how have things changed from when you were younger in LaPorte County to where you are now? Maybe something's better, maybe something's worse, or would you just say in general things are better? But typically these kind of questions are more nuanced than that, right? Some things are better, some things are worse. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think I can't say it's improved. We have a few more minority teachers now than we had before. But when I was in school, all of the black teachers that I had were health and PE primarily. I'm trying to think if I had anybody. Nope, I don't think so. But most of our kids don't come back here that are black when they get their degrees. That's more of the norm, because you're kind of, if you come back here, there aren't many opportunities. I moved back here, but I was living in Chicago when I first came back. So I left here and went to college in Florida, and then I moved to Texas and moved all around and moved back because the company I worked for the phone company, we bought Ameritech. So they relocated me to Chicago, and I had some rental property here. And when I took a buyout, I decided to stay here. And that was a choice I made, but I never thought I would come back. I said when I left, I was like, I'm never coming back. I just didn't see an opportunity for me to be in Michigan City or LaPorte County as a black person. So, my kids, I thought they had a good upbringing here. We've been here 15 years now. But my daughter was like, no, I'm not coming back. So she went to Purdue and got her degree, and then she went to Florida State and got her master's, and now she's in Texas. She has no desire to live here. She said, what would I come there for? There aren't any specific jobs I would want. How am I going to meet young adults that have degree, same kind of lifestyle that I, nightlife and all that. We just don't have that. So I don't know how we attract and retain young people.
Sure.
I think that's the main thing.
What about you guys? Anything that you think that you can think of has changed, or for the good or the bad?
There's more black people in LaPorte than there were when I was growing up here.
Oh, yeah.
I see people at the grocery store. I don't know who they are.
That's
We
true.
used to be able to know who they were. So I
Right,
see people
yeah.
I don't know who they are. So that's
That's
When
a
you-
nice feeling.
yeah.
Yeah, because you knew all the families. I mean, we knew all the families. Even in Michigan City, we knew all the families that were black in LaPorte County, in LaPorte or Kingsford Heights. I mean, we knew the Dunlaps, we knew everybody. Now it's different, I guess.
You know, it's good because it's becoming more diverse. And then the other thing is you see more minorities in positions of leadership. So in our local government, even, I'm the director of a county agency, and my assistant director is also African American. I don't think growing up that was the case.
That's true. Michigan City too, with the superintendent of schools, and so yeah, that has changed. But
It has changed from when I was here, and it's grown. I do see change, and we made a decision to raise our kids in LaPorte, basically because it would give them a opportunity to deal with some of the things that we knew, because it's still Indiana, but we felt it was safe. So our kids don't want to live here either. They like Chicago. They want to go. My youngest, she is a townie, and the kids call her a townie because she's strictly a Indiana girl. She goes mudding. She likes country music. She likes horses, and I keep saying, "Who are you?" But what I have noticed in LaPorte is the mix of grandkids. If you stop and look around, there are many mixed grandkids, and they're with grandmas. And that is different. And that's a change that's happening, because you don't mess with a grandkid, not with a grandma around. You're in trouble. And I see white grandmas with mixed kids. And I'm seeing that more and more and more. So the money's already in the bank. The other thing you see the money's in the bank is there are 2 African-American women sitting here. More women are graduating from our higher institutions, whites and blacks, minorities, than there are black males or white males. The money's in the bank. They're going to be our future leaders. So you got to get used to it now, because it's changing and it's not going to go back, because they've got the education, the experience, and they're going to drive it forward. So it's going to be a change. The only constant is change.
How many of you have sons? Do you have a son?
stepson
Stepson? You have a son?
Yes.
and brothers. I have 4 brothers.
Okay, yeah, okay. So, it's more of a statement, but I think there's an implicit question in this. As white parents, we never have to have the talk with our teenage sons.
Yeah.
It's difficult to understand how many people cannot understand this concept. I have a dear friend in Chicago. She's a pastor at an African American church. Gail Rice is her name, and she had to send her son back down to college in the summer because she was afraid. He'd gotten pulled over, and there was didn't do anything, but she said, "You got to get out of here."
There is a talk.
What is that like?
You have to have the talk. I'm 10 years, 15 years older than my brother, so he is like a son. And, you have to talk to them about their dress. We shouldn't have to do this, but, I have a brother that's in law enforcement, and there are still pockets of areas, even in Florida and the South, that even as a law enforcement officer, he was off duty, but he was pulled over and treated some kind of way, even as a member of the SHIELD.
Yep.
It was some backwoods town, and they said they didn't care where the hell he came from, right? I'm sorry,
No,
but that's
hell's in the Bible. You're fine.
but that's what they said to him.
So is ass? That's in the Bible too. So you can say that one.
But that's what another
Moses.
law enforcement officer said to him in worse terms than that. And so I tell my brothers, and I've always told them that You know, they have to always be presented in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be wearing clothes that are, you know, sagging, baggy, and even if they're not, but then if they're dressed appropriately, they're
It
still.
can still happen.
Well,
Right.
where are you from, and why are you here, and you know,
Think
all
you
that
are.
questioning. But I just tell them, you know, just be respectful. I mean, that's all you can do is be respectful, no matter, you know, what the aggression is. But I thought it was remarkable that my brother was a law enforcement aide, you know, sheriff's deputy, and he was in 2 counties over, and he was treated some kind of way. So
Richard, did you have to have the talk with RJ?
Oh, of course. I mean, we would talk about it, and there's the one thing in our family, we've always talked about race. I mean, we walk in our house, and it's there. So we always had to deal with it. But RJ grew up here, but he was a preppy. So unlike, I worry more about Keisha than I did RJ, because Keisha was more of an actor. She would definitely not, you know, she would just tell you whatever. But RJ was smart enough, and he always made the comment, he says, you know, Dad, when you'd had those talks to Keisha, I was listening. And so he always carried himself. He did run into a situation in Chicago when he was going to St. Xavier one night, and he was out with some friends, and I believe the girl was white in the car, and there was 2 other black dudes in there with him. And they stopped the car. They were going to impound his car, and he called home to Mom, and he was beside himself because of how they had treated him. So that was the first time he'd really been treated that way. But he realized what situation he was in and how he had to respond because of the conversations we'd had. So he knew not to go do anything crazy, but to talk his way out and to deal with what he had to deal with and to move forward. But yes, we talked to him about that. And my cousins and Wayne Pate is my cousin. And, you know, we both grew up here, and there was times we knew about those kinds of things, and you had to have the talk. Charles Biggers was my neighbor. Most people might know him. He graduated in 1964, 65. He was one of the first black athletes to play on LaPorte High School that actually started. And my sister told me once that they went after practice, after a game, they went to Charlie's to get a pizza, and the coach told him, and that was Klimzak, said, you can't come in here at this point. I'm sorry. So he had to walk home. And that was in the mid-'60s. So, you know, and his mother, I remember Mrs. Biggers, my neighbor, she was beside herself because this was her kids. But we all had that conversation. We all knew what you could do, what you could not do. My parents had the conversation with me. Here's what you can do. You need to watch out. And they worried about me all the time that I was out. So, I mean, just being a male, you had to be careful.
I do appreciate this question because it's an honest question. So, and maybe you guys can appreciate it too. But what do you prefer to be called, Black or African American?
it doesn't matter to me. As long as it's not colored. We had that conversation. I mean, it happened.
Somebody was calling you.
No, we were in a class. We were in Leadership LaPorte class.
Somebody in Leadership LaPorte call you colored?
They used the term colored,
They do.
and I said, and it was out of love because I knew the person,
Yeah.
and I said, don't fret, it's okay, but don't use that because. Especially in my generation, colored is during the civil rights movement when bad things were happening. So all we know from history is that the colored, you know, they had colored for the bathrooms and the drinking fountains and all that. So don't use that. And I don't think people realize that because nobody's ever asked. And I was like, you know, and it was just conversation. I was like, let me go back to something. Don't use that. Don't use that. Don't say that. That's not a term of endearment. I mean, I understand if your parents said that, but don't use that.
There's a history with that word.
Yes, right? Yes. So yes, but Black, African American doesn't matter to me.
So it doesn't really matter to me. I prefer Black. Simple. I'm Black.
Mm-hmm.
But African American is fine too.
Yeah.
I'll answer to either of them. Just don't call me late for dinner.
So silly.
That's why we have Richard on the panel. There's a question about this because again, majority of LaPorte is white. Many of the people in this room are white. Obviously, it's a kind of a conversation. It is happening on a federal level, but we I think appreciate what the conversation on blackface right now.
Oh goodness!
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
I mean, point blank, don't do it.
Right, mark it off your list.
Well,
but what does that make you feel though?
So last night every Thursday we've been having Black Cinema Night in Michigan City during this month. So last night it was the Black Klansman was played, and Selma was last week, I think. And one of the things came up because the term pickaninny came up yesterday, and me and my niece had a conversation about that word because I hadn't heard that word in forever. But we were talking about how fashion now, you see all the issues that are happening with a lot of the designers are using exaggerated blackface kind of looking, purses and a noose around the neck, shoes and different
like
things.
A turtleneck or
right,
something.
right.
Yeah.
So that's happening for a reason, because I think that we have gotten so far removed from what happened in the 60s and the 50s and the civil rights movement that our kids have zero clue. So now you have a new breed or new generation of designers and young people that are clueless about what happened and what those things represent. So now we're coming full circle because I hadn't heard that term in forever, and it came up in the movie in Black Klansman, and we talked about that. So blackface, I mean, I don't know anybody who looks like that, number one. It's so exaggerated, and it was done on purpose because they said, we talk about slaves, and I'm like, okay, slavery, you brought black people here to work, but then soon as, who said that today? Someone said, but as soon as you start paying them, they were lazy. Someone said that, and I was thinking to myself, wow, that's an interesting comment. I don't know who I was talking to, but that came up.
Somebody
and I was
said
like,
that to you?
We were having a conversation, and we were talking about slavery, how, the conversation is, slaves were brought here, and they were here, they can work, they were hard workers, they did all this work in the field. Soon as it was abolished, all of a sudden black people were lazy, because you had to pay them now, right? And that was a deep conversation, and I was thinking to myself, man, that, you know what? That's exactly how it was flipped. And so then as they start doing this, putting all this news out, and that's when the blackface came, and they started exaggerating all the features. I don't know anybody who looks like that or talks like that. And but that's the way it was. I think it was probably in the movie last night. I think that's how it came up last night. Because after each movie, we have a conversation. And there were a lot of adults and a lot of it was like 4 different generations of people in the audience. So the conversation got a little deep on that whole blackface thing yesterday. And I was like, oh. But our kids didn't know anything about it. My kids didn't know anything about it.
That's a great, because we've had this question a couple times. Are we teaching Black History Month and the Black experience well enough right now?
No.
I'm not sure what history, what they teach in history books now, but I didn't learn about most things Black history until I went to college.
Same.
So I took a Black history class at a Black school. So we learned about things that were meaningful and enriching because all my professors were Black, had PhDs. So the experience was different. I got, my calculus professor is a PhD in math, and our president of the college is a PhD in chemistry. So, and they're Black. So, different perspective.
Right.
Different perspective.
I learned about Black, like I said, in the Navy. I took a Black history course through the advanced education. And I got a history book about that thick. I still have it somewhere, all my stuff packed away. But it went from the beginning all the way through, and there were so many things in there. Because I loved history in high school. I took history. I was a good student. That was one of my better courses. But I read that book, and that made me mad. Because I said, here's all these things that someone could have said easily. These were black people that did that. These were black people were here. But that was never a thing. We had one chapter in our history book that said they were slaves. That was it.
So the black experience and the black historical movement is really just kind of pushed to, oh, there was slaves.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I go on Ancestry.com, and I have found my great-great-grandfather. I can trace him back to 1840. He is listed on a 1858 document of the slave owner as one of the slaves. They had like 90. And he was Edmund, his name was Edmund Pate, and he was 27, and he was worth $1,200. That's on the document. I went back and looked through newspapers and found out after the Civil War, New Orleans area was freed in 1863 when the Union Army came down and freed Baton Rouge and New Orleans. He is listed in the paper of St. Francisville, Louisiana, as he is a voting rights commissioner in 1876 and 1879. But then he doesn't list it after that. That's when the white liners came in and they took over. The white liners were the precursor to the Ku Klux Klan. And they came into his county and killed 47 blacks at that point, and I'm sure they were after him, but my family's always told me that the Pate side of the family was pretty nuts, and we stood our ground. And he survived because he lived until the 20s, but I don't have any other history of him. And his grandson, my grandfather, was one of the first black troops to fight overseas in the Battle of the Argonne Forest, and he went back as a sharecropper. So that's the kind of history that I have to dig up to find for myself. Most blacks, they go look back. They're fortunate to get back that far, if any, because there's no history of them. They were property. So you really have to dig to find out anything about black history. But, you look at the 60s, the 20s, the 30s, there were a lot of things that African Americans had done, even prior to it, that we know, but it's not being taught.
Yeah.
I appreciate, Richard, that you brought up the story of Emmett Till. I honestly hadn't heard that story until I was an adult. I didn't learn that story, and it kind of took me on a journey through. I've been very fascinated with trying to learn more about the black pastoral movement in the South that helped with civil rights and voting rights specifically. Mm-hmm. It's stories that need to be told. Quite frankly, too, as an American, I need to hear these stories too. Right. We all need to hear these stories. They're so important.
And one of the things that I want to say on that is what's helped me through my life to realize that is in a lot of those pictures where you see those people during the civil rights movement, you'll see black people, you also see white people in there.
That's correct.
And I know Reverend Hesburgh, Martin Luther King asked him to go over to Chicago when he was doing that. He said he'd never been in a situation, he said it was the first time he was ever scared for his life. But yet there were still whites who were there standing beside. When we were in Pennsylvania and the abolitionist movement, here were people running the Underground Railroad in the 80s, risking all. They would have lost all. They would have gone to jail to free slaves out of the South. They were white.
Look at Charlottesville. I mean, if you look at the pictures from Charlottesville, the majority of the people there were white.
Yeah, and marching.
Right, and that's the thing. And I think people don't realize this is a human issue, not just a race issue. And for anything to get done, it has to be everybody.
That's right.
Having, being a part of it. So.
And it makes you thankful to realize that there are other people that are standing there with you.
Yeah, and there was a question given essentially about is it good or should we be known by our race, or essentially is it better just to say we're one human race? How do you celebrate your ethnicity Well, also.
We were having a conversation. This was it was political, but when people say they don't see race or don't see color, that's a problem. I mean, you have to see me when I walk in and respect the fact that I'm black. I mean, I don't see how you get around me not being black, because if when people say that, I think it's more out of protecting themselves. I don't see color. I mean,
exactly.
You can't help but see color, and you have to deal with it. Right. And I think we respect one another, because I have different experiences than someone who's white. I mean, and vice versa. But that's when you learn about things.
Right.
I mean, I remember the first time I spent the night at someone's home who was a different race. I mean, it's one of those things, and I think it's funny when you're a kid because you don't really care. Mm-hmm. But then you start, it's laughter because you're assuming things. And I'm going to give you one good example that floored me. So I had, I raised some kids from other countries. They stayed with me through high school. One is definitely my son. He says he's Blasian because he's black and he's from South Korea. And he's funny. He's hilarious. But I remember the first time we were at home, and he lived with us. This is probably the second year he lived with us. And he was like, the bottom of your feet are white. And I was like, what? I mean, but think about it. He's from another country. He's been staying with us for 2 years. He's the brother for my daughters. He's my kid. I take care of him. And he just couldn't believe it. And I was thinking, what in the world is he looking at? I mean, what made him think? It was just those little things, even with countries. People from other countries assume things about black people because they only see certain things or only hear certain things. But I just was like, huh? He said, the bottom of your feet are white. And I just was like, are you joking? Are you for real?
Is this a serious
right? And he was really like dumbfounded. Yeah. And I was just thinking to myself, wow, this is different, you know. So I mean, we have a lot of different, my house has been the United Nations. So South Korean, Vietnamese, those two live with us for a couple of years. So Macedonian, 6'6" or something that live with us. So we're a cross-cultural family, but just the little things that we've learned from one another was different.
So instead of pretending like we're colorblind, which, again, implicit bias means just they're there, right?
Yes.
Learn to celebrate, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Learn to celebrate our differences and learn.
Yep.
Right. When I walk into anywhere, it's in my early career, I walked in, the first thing I just, where am I? And who are these people? Like I told you, I went to work in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. And there were 3 blacks with 500 people in the plant. Well, first thing, I'm noticing that. Bing. Right. Your brain is picking up your eyes long before you actually think. So to say you don't see it, I'm sorry. It's a reality. But you celebrate it. One of the first questions I always ask people, and I'm not shy, I'll ask it, what are you? Where are you from? And it shocks them.
Not me.
What are you?
Yeah, I'm saying, where are you from?
What are you?
Yeah, what are you? I was down in Indy a couple of days ago, and the dental professor, she was walking around, and I said, where are you from? Because it's international down there now. And she was saying, well, I'm Persian. Okay, well, that's a flag anyway. So tell me, I had to ask her some more questions. Well, she was Iranian. And she didn't want to say she was Iranian, but she said she was Persian. Mm. But I talked to her, and we started talking, and after that, she started talking more. Because you go right at it. I don't hide from what you are, but I celebrate who you are. And I start talking about the food and the great food that they have and the different things. And she was very open to that. But that's, you got to talk to people, and you cannot hide of who they are.
Yeah.
I just want to quickly, I think when you celebrate and recognize your differences, it helps you understand better.
Right.
So, because my experience, Summer there, wave. I've known Summer since the 2nd grade. She's one of my close friends. But we have very different experiences, but she's one person that, she's white and I'm black. And we have different experiences, but we can talk about it. And with everything that's going on with the world right now, sometimes we have differences of opinion, but she and I are able to talk about my experience and her experience, her perspective, my perspective, and that just creates an environment where we can learn from each other and heal. And I think that's the problem. If you ignore your differences, you're putting a Band-Aid on it. That doesn't solve anything. You have to talk about it. You have to talk about race. You have to talk about experiences.
Right. Diversity is our strength.
I want to talk. And we've just got just a couple more minutes and we're done. But I love this question, so I got to ask it. What is, and each of you can say, what's one thing that you think well-intentioned white people should stop doing when they talk about or deal with race?
Think
Such a
about
good
that.
question.
She's looking at it.
I was looking at my mother because she said something.
Oh, wait. You want to answer this? You come up here. Come up here.
Be careful.
Don't
Don't give her the microphone.
Is there anything, people say that are well-intentioned, but probably not helpful?
I'm trying to think.
And
there are things.
Yeah.
I know my daughter right now, people want to touch her hair, and she hates that.
That's a good one.
And I'm just thinking, okay.
Is that your real hair? Or how? What? I don't understand. What?
Yeah, they try to touch her hair. She hates that. And I mean, I can't think of anything specific. I know there are things, but
Something that's kind of annoying is just Angie mentioned it earlier, just kind of like using the slang and the vernacular, trying to, you go boy. Somebody said that earlier on the panel.
Angie. I told her. I said, Angie, don't you do it. Don't you do it, Angie.
But yeah, I think that's probably, just making some assumptions that you've had different experiences or, that everybody's from the ghetto who's black or something. Just things like that. But the hair thing is probably one of the biggest things, especially when I used to have an afro. And I remember going through the airport and then them putting their hands in my hair. And I was thinking to myself, are you kidding me that you're sticking your hands in my hair like
With
that?
a dirty glove.
Yeah. So, they stopped that because it made the news.
They still do it.
It made the news too, though.
They still do it.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things I think that bothered me. Probably
I used
the
to have
most.
a big fro too, and people used to always touch that when I was in high school. I don't see that as much. And then the other issue of the language. I was on the NYSOR Speakers Bureau, so I would go before classes, groups like this, and talk the NYSOR story. So one day I went into my daughter's class. She asked me to come over, middle school, Boston. And I'm in there, and I'm talking in my suit. And one of the little guys in the class leans over to her, next to her, she says, "Your dad is the whitest black man I've ever seen." And she said, "What are you saying? Because you don't say, get up and talk like this?" She says, "What's wrong with that?" He says, "But yeah, he's the whitest black man I've ever seen."
Now, that's one thing I don't care for, that black people are articulate, that comment. So they assume, he's very articulate, or she's articulate. And it's like, well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I mean, I graduated from the same school you did. I mean, what does that mean? But you tend to do that. I mean, I think about when Barack Obama was being, going through his process, and he's a very articulate African-American man. And and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I've never heard a white person been called like articulate usually. I mean, it's
Right.
not like the first thing that usually comes to mind.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing when you see someone who's educated and who's black, they're articulate, or, those kind of things.
That's
So,
very appreciated in this environment today.
yeah, that's it.
All right, so
That's true.
we end with this question with every panel, okay? And it's just a question that we give to every panelist, same question. What brings you hope? Richard, what brings you hope?
Millennials. I was telling people earlier that millennials are looking at the environment we live in, and they're pissed. And they want
That's not in the Bible, by the way.
Yeah, it is. Because they peed against the wall. But they are not only mad, but they are taking action. I say they are the boomers of the 60s. They give me hope because that's when I grew up, and that's when I had a lot of hope, but a lot of my boomers have become like our parents. Mm-hmm. And that bothers me. But I see these millennials, they're out there and they're ticked, and they're taking action. The kids from the Florida shooting. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are high school kids, and they're not taking no. They want to see a change, and they're going after it. So I'm very hopeful that they will do what we did. They'll take it to the next level.
Erica, what brings you hope?
Family. And then, I mean, that's my generic answer, family.
It's okay.
But just doing things like this. It's innovative. It's something that's new. And then look how many people are here.
Right.
You know, I think, things like these town hall type things,
Mm-hmm.
I think that brings me hope that there are people out there who are willing to listen and engage.
Yeah.
They both kind of took what I would have said,
that's
but I agree.
that worst part of going last.
Right. But I agree. I think my kids, I think just seeing the diversity in families, I think most families are now all diverse. There's an extension of some other that used to be the other that now has become the norm. So I think people are just more open, and I think our kids are going to be those people, that, they don't, we don't see color. We talked about that, but they really have the most diverse group of friends now. I mean, it's not as segregated as it used to be. Like I said, you get to a certain age, and all of a sudden you become a part of your own clique of friends, and I see that as more open now.
Right.
Well, will you please give a round of applause for our panel?
And applaud you.
I do want to say again, the goals of these conversations aren't to teach or anything. We all learn, but it's to listen to each other's experiences and opinions, and we glean from it what we can, and we listen and we learn, and we open our hearts and our minds to our neighbors. And even if you don't live next door to them, we're all neighbors here. We all live in the same community. We all care about the same things to the future of our community. And so I'm glad you're here. I'm glad if you streamed with us, I'm glad you streamed with us. And maybe you're just watching the podcast afterwards. I'm glad you did that. And if you want to do anything for us, if you want to help us out at all, just be good to each other and love each other well, and listen and learn, and see how you can help another person throughout their life in whatever way you can, and that's the best help you can give to us. So thank you so much for being here. Next month we'll have another discussion over dinner. If you haven't liked us on Facebook, go to Discussion Over Dinner on Facebook, or go to discussionoverdinner.com and subscribe. You can go to any of our podcast sites and get that. I want to thank you to our team that cooked dinner tonight, Joel Crain and Jeff Meinhard. Yep. Thank you to Pastor Becky Crain. She handled all of this, getting everything ready. Gwen Hollinger helped get everything set up. We have a team. Kelli Tanger did a lot of the content development. Thank you so much for everyone that does so much to keep this going. We have a blast doing these. I hope you come back next month in March to our next one. So thanks so much. Have a good night.
Come from when I'm in the studio until the sun comes. Got me thinking